Hello everyone and welcome to another Commander Tactics Deck Tech. My name's Pope. If playing big creatures and swinging for big damage is what you love, then today's deck is not for you because we're building around the Izzet legend that is Niv-Mizzet Parun. Niv-Mizzet for 3 red and 3 blue cannot be countered. He is flying and says whenever we draw a card, we get to ping any target for 1 damage. But also, anytime any player casts an instant or sorcery, we draw a card. Card draw on a commander is one of the most powerful abilities as it provides us a reliable way to keep our hand full of options. Obviously, we're going to be casting a selection of instant and sorcery spells to get the most out of Niv-Mizzet's ability, but we also have several other lines of play that make this deck a well-rounded machine. The focus of our deck is to draw tons of cards with Niv-Mizzet on board, then use our supporting creatures and spells to burn down our opponent's life total through effects and additional card draw. And mixed in with this, we have a few different special combos that make this deck lean more towards a competitive build. The best part about it, this deck is only $80 and offers up a ton of power for such a cheap price. Since Niv-Mizzet's release, there have been a ton of great new cards added from War of the Spark and Throne of Eldraine that I love featuring in this deck to really soup it up and take it to another level. But now, let's get the card draw flowing in, taking a look at all the ways we're going to be capitalizing on our commander's card draw abilities, starting off with the Whirlpool trio that is Whirlpool Warrior, Rider, and Drake. I always love when Wizards takes a word and connects it between multiple spells to do a similar effect. Each of these creatures have the same first lines of text, and that is whenever they enter the battlefield, we shuffle our hand into our library and draw that many cards. It's not a May ability, by the way, so don't make that mistake. Whirlpool Warrior has the ability that for 1 red mana we can sack it to make the whole table wheel their hand, and Whirlpool Drake wheels our hand a second time after it dies. As you can imagine, with these creatures and similar effects like these on our other creatures, we're never going to be missing land drops, we're going to be drawing a ton of cards, and always being able to dig for that answer when we need to. Next up, we have 3 more creatures going to help us keep our hand full, drawing tons of cards: Jace's Archivist, Magus of the Wheel, and Cavalier of Flame. Jace's Archivist for 3 mana, 1 a blue and a blue. We get a creature that for a blue, we can tap it, and each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So this is a windfall on a creature. And it is repeatable, by the way. We do not have to sack the Archivist or anything like that. Magus of the Wheel, a similar effect. For 2 and a red, we get another creature that for 1 and a red, we can tap it, sacrifice it, and each player discards their hand and draws 7. With Niv-Mizzet on board for only 2 mana, we are getting to refill our entire hand back to 7 and dish out 7 points of damage however we want. Next up, we have 2 artifacts and 2 enchantments that are going to ensure we have cards going in and out of our hand as much as possible. Folio of Fancies, Midnight Clock, Fevered Visions, and Dictate of Kruphix. Folio of Fancies and Midnight Clock both coming straight from Throne of Eldraine. Both of these new artifacts synergize so well with Niv-Mizzet and keep on point with the theme that we are trying to accomplish, and that is drawing tons of cards. Folio of Fancies does affect all players at the table though, saying all players have no maximum hand size, and then we can pay double X to make each player draw X cards, or for 3 mana, we can mill each opponent for the number of cards in their hand. This second ability is very relevant as we will be talking about an alternate win condition later in this video. Being in red and blue doesn't give us a whole lot of options for mana ramp, but Midnight Clock does offer that temporarily. For 2 a blue and a blue, we get an artifact that taps for just blue, but that's okay. And then for 3 mana, we can put an hour counter on it. And at the beginning of each upkeep, we get to put another hour counter on it. And when we hit 12 counters, we shuffle our hand and graveyard into our library and draw 7. Important to note on Midnight Clock that each counter does go on at each upkeep, so it will be 4 counters per rotation. So on the 3rd turn after Midnight Clock was cast, we will then exile it, shuffle everything up, and draw that new 7. Fevered Visions, an enchantment for 3 mana, comes in and it says at the beginning of each player's end step, that player draws a card. If that player is your opponent and has 4 or more cards in their hand, Fevered Visions is then going to deal 2 damage to him or her. And Dictate of Kruphix, a similar enchantment. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. We can cast this on the end step of the opponent right before us and get first use of it. While having our opponents draw additional cards might not seem too intuitive, again, we will be using this to our advantage later when we talk about the alternate win condition. Next, we have 2 spells that we can dump a lot of mana into X values with Finale of Revelation and Read the Runes. Finale of Revelation, X, a blue and a blue, we're going to draw X cards, and if X is 10 or more, instead we're going to shuffle our graveyard into our library, draw 10 or however much it was, untap 5 lands, and we have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game, and then you exile Finale when it's done. And read the runes. For X and a blue, draw X cards. For each card drawn this way, we discard a card unless we sacrifice a permanent. With Niv-Mizzet on board, each X that we put into these spells is dealing 1 damage to any target of our choosing as well. Simply drawing cards isn't going to win us the game though, so let's take a look at the instants and sorceries and effects that we're going to generate big damage off of. Starting things off with 4 mana reducers in Goblin Electromancer, Curious Homunculus, Jace's Sanctum, and Primal Amulet. Goblin Electromancer, a spell slinging Izzet staple. Instants and sorceries we cast cost 1 less. Curious Homunculus taps for 1 colorless, and we have to use that colorless on an instant or sorcery spell. And at the beginning of our upkeep, if there are 3 or more instants or sorceries in our graveyard, we can transform Curious Homunculus. Reaching that threshold of 3 instants or sorceries is pretty easy, and when we do, it's going to transform into Voracious Reader, and instants and sorcery spells we cast are going to cost 1 less. Then we have Jace's Sanctum and Enchantment. Same effect, instants and sorcery spells we cast cost 1 less, but also whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, we're going to get to scry 1. And lastly, Primal Amulet, an artifact for 4 mana. Instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we're going to put a charge counter on Primal Amulet. Then if there are 4 more charge counters on it, we can remove them and transform it into Primal Wellspring, the land, tap it, add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. When that mana is spent on an instant or sorcery, we get to copy it for free. Obviously, Primal Amulet is insane value in this deck by itself, but if we can get it to transform into the Wellspring, it is going to be a game changer. Then we have a couple token generators to help us keep our defenses up to ensure we don't get overrun by any creature-heavy decks. Tauren Sky Summoner and Saheeli Sublime Artificer. With Tauren, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we're going to create a 2/2 Drake creature token with flying. It's great that it has flying to help us block against any incoming flyers. And Saheeli Sublime Artificer, whenever we cast any non-creature spell, we're going to create a 1/1 Servo Artifact token creature. Both of these spells are great and can generate tons of artifacts depending on how many instants and sorceries we're casting, and hopefully it will be enough to deter our opponents from attacking us. Next, we have 4 creatures that are going to do boatloads of damage, but none by attacking. Gutter Snipe, Firebrand Archer, Psychosis Crawler, and Niv-Mizzet the Firemind. Anytime we cast an instant or sorcery spell with Gutter Snipe on the board, we're going to ping each of our opponents for 2 damage. Firebrand Archer, a similar ability, but whenever we cast any non-creature spell, we're going to deal 1 damage to each opponent. Off of all the instants and sorceries we're going to be casting in this deck, these can add up quickly. Psychosis Crawler and Niv-Mizzet the Firemind doing damage a little bit differently. Psychosis Crawler says, power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your hand, and whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. Niv-Mizzet the Firemind, similar effect. Whenever we draw a card, Niv-Mizzet the Firemind deals 1 damage to target creature or player. You know we're going to be drawing tons of cards in this deck, so Psychosis Crawler and Niv-Mizzet the Firemind are going to be pumping out the damage. And since we are casting so many instants and sorcery spells, let's take a look at a few things that we're going to be using to double them. Swarm Intelligence, Ral Storm Conduit, and Expansion Explosion. Swarm Intelligence, an enchantment that is simply going to allow us to copy any instants or sorceries we cast. Ral Storm Conduit offers up a couple additions. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery with him on the field, he's going to deal 1 damage to any target opponent or planeswalker. We can +2 him to scry in case we're looking for a particular card, or we can -2 him to make it where whenever we cast our next instant or sorcery spell, it's going to copy it. If we can keep Ral out of harm's way, we will be able to copy multiple spells with him and put out a few pings of damage with his static ability. And then Expansion Explosion, giving us an option. We can either pay 2 mana and copy a target instant or sorcery spell with CMC 4 or less, or we can pay an X mana with 2 blue and 2 red, and Explosion is going to deal X damage to any target, and target player draws X cards. With Swarm Intelligence or Ral Storm Conduits -2, if we can put a lot of numbers into X on the Explosion side, we can deal a ton of damage and draw a ton of cards. And lastly, a new card I just absolutely had to include in this deck, Torbran, Thane of Redfell. Torbran in this deck is an absolute monster, increasing all the damage from our Gutter Snipe, our Firebrand Archer, our Fevered Visions, and of course, off of our Niv-Mizzet draws, we are now going to be able to ping everyone for 3 damage at a time. With Torbran and Niv-Mizzet or any other pingers on the board, there is a good chance we will be able to just devastate the board and take out multiple opponents. One thing I do absolutely love about this deck and Niv-Mizzet Parun is his ability to combo off utilizing only 1 or 2 additional spells. But now let's take a look at those combos and see how we're going to use them to end games. The first combo we're going to be taking a look at in this deck is Peregrine Drake paired with Deadeye Navigator. Peregrine Drake for 5 mana comes in and says whenever it enters the battlefield, we can untap up to 5 lands. This paired with Deadeye Navigator that has Soul Bond. As long as Deadeye Navigator is paired with another creature through the Soul Bond ability, each of those creatures has pay 2 mana, 1 in a blue, exile this creature, then return it to the battlefield under your control. With Peregrine Drake soulbound to Deadeye Navigator, we will have infinite mana. We can pay 2 mana to flicker Peregrine Drake, float some mana in between, and then repeat the process over and over again until we have as much mana as we need. We can then dump all that mana into big X spells, the Finales, the Explosion Expansion, or even into the Folio of Fancy's abilities. This is a super easy 2-card combo, but even if your opponents know what's coming, it is kind of difficult for them to interact, as we can use Deadeye Navigator to avoid any targeted removal. These 3 next combo pieces work with Niv-Mizzet Parun, our commander, and Niv-Mizzet the Firemind. They are Curiosity, Ophidian Eye, and Tandem Lookout. These 3 spells in conjunction with either of those 2 creatures almost assuredly results in a win. Curiosity and Ophidian Eye have almost the exact same text, except Ophidian Eye has Flash. It says, whenever enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. These spells enchanted to either of the Niv-Mizzets mean we will get to draw a card, deal 1 damage, then draw a card, and continue to loop the process until we have drawn out our entire deck. Because they do say may, we don't have to draw out our entire deck, we can stop whenever. But by the time these spells come down onto a Niv-Mizzet, we can almost guarantee that we're going to be killing at least 2 opponents. Tandem Lookout, a very similar ability on a creature, has Soulbound as well. As long as Tandem Lookout is paired with another creature, each of those creatures has, whenever this creature deals damage to an opponent, draw a card. While Tandem Lookout doesn't say may, we do have to draw a card. But the way that we end this loop with Tandem Lookout is we simply have Niv-Mizzet opt to ping himself so we don't continue to draw cards. With these 3 spells, we can deal out on average 70 to 80 damage at one time and draw out our entire deck, and in that instance that we should have no problem being able to finish off the game. And then the last 3 pieces of this deck for our combo win cons: Sphinx's Tutelage, Psychic Corrosion, and Jace's Erasure. That's right, we are going to mill out our opponents. Sphinx's Tutelage and Enchantment, whenever you draw a card, target opponent mills the top 2 cards of their library. If they're both non-land cards that share a color, we get to do it again to them. And then the second feature of Sphinx's Tutelage is we can pay 6 mana, draw a card, and discard a card. This, in conjunction with the Peregrine Drake combo, means we can draw our entire deck and mill out all of our opponents in the process. Psychic Corrosion, another enchantment coming out of M19. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. With Psychic Corrosion on board, we basically just have to draw 40 cards. And in this deck, I think that's a real possibility. And then Jace's Erasure, whenever you draw a card, you may have target player mill the top card of his or her library into their graveyard. With these cards, in conjunction with Folio of Fancies, Fevered Visions, and Dictate of Kruphix, our opponents are going to be drawing cards and milling faster than they can be playing the spells they draw. I should note here that milling somebody out is pretty hard in Commander, but with these set up properly, we can absolutely make it happen. But now we know a little bit about how this engine runs. Let's take a deeper dive looking at what else is inside the 99. For our removal and control in this deck, we have 3 spells that are going to target removal. We have 3 counter spells as well. We have 4 board wipes, and then we have tons of additional ping damage from all of the instants and sorceries that cause effects to trigger. card advantage in this deck is a no-brainer. We have about 1,000 cards that are going to help us draw out our entire deck, so we will never be left empty-handed. And our ramp package, for only being in red and blue, is actually pretty good, with 7 mana rocks and then multiple spells that are going to reduce the cost of our instants and sorceries. And then winning with this deck can be broken down into 3 simple measures. Number 1, we're going to combo off using things like Tandem, Lookout, and Curiosity in conjunction with our dragons. We're going to draw out all of our deck and deal enough damage to kill all of our opponents. If that doesn't work, we'll go for the mill approach, using Folio of Fancies to make our opponents draw tons of cards and then mill them out using our additional enchantments. If that still hasn't gotten the job done, well, we're in it for the long haul, and we're going to be using our abilities and effects to slowly ping down and grind out our opponent's life. Usually this is where we wrap things up, but moving forward, we're going to be presenting you with a few alternatives you might want to use when deck building yourself, starting with our budget alternatives. Tolarian Winds, Psychic, Spiral, and Niv-Mizzet Paragon each come in and do something that synergize very well with this deck and come in altogether less than $1. Tolarian Winds lets us wheel our hand, Psychic Spiral is going to mill our opponent, and Niv-Mizzet Paragon is going to let us copy spells and cast instants and sorceries from the top of our deck. A few upgrades you might consider when building this deck if you have them, or if you're just looking to soup it up: Baral, Chief of Compliance, the Locust God, and Past in Flames. Baral is going to reduce our instants and sorceries by 1, and if we counter something, we get to draw a card. Locust God, just such a strong creature, but whenever we draw a card, we're going to create a 1/1 blue and red insect creature token with flying and haste. We can pay 4 to draw and discard a card, and when the Locust God dies, we get to return him back to our hand at the beginning of the next end step. And Past in Flames, going to give all of our instants and sorceries in our graveyard flashback. Flashback cost equaling how much they originally cost. This is going to allow us to recast all those instants and sorceries that we've already used, and Past in Flame has flashback as well. 3 great upgrades that each bring something different to the table. But that is going to wrap up this spell slinging, card drawing, deck milling madhouse of a commander deck. Niv-Mizzet is such a great commander because he can be built to do so many different things at so many different deck levels. All the great new additions coming in from recent set make Niv-Mizzet that much more exciting to play. Let me know down in the comments what you think of this deck. What would you add? What would you replace? If you did enjoy the deck tech though, make sure you hit that like button to let us know. A new Commander deck tech goes live every Friday at 9 a.m. Central. If you want to be notified when each of our videos goes live, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification. If Twitter is your fancy, you can find us there at EDH Tactics. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you guys for the next one.